The optimist sees the storm on the horizon and packs an umbrella and sunscreen, expecting and anticipating the rainbow on the other side. The pessimist complains about getting wet. My great-grandfather, he'd be building weather apps and improving drainage systems, wondering why we're all complaining and debating the forecast. This is a photo of my great-grandfather, Wu Shou, and my great-grandmother, Lum Shi. It was taken in 1920 on their wedding day. But their story doesn't begin here. Wu Shou was born into poverty in 1887 in a small town in the Sunhui province in China. Actually, the village where he was born, Sadui, literally means pile of sand. Shou Woo's story begins with a search. Some of his uncles were among the 15,000 Chinese laborers who went to the Pacific Northwest to work on the railroad and in the mines. They faced horrific conditions, discrimination, and daily risk of death. One of his uncles was killed in a mine in what is now Washington State. So, when Wu Shou was just 11 years old, he boarded a ship with another uncle bound for Canada, Vancouver, Canada. Their mission, to find the lost uncle's grave. By show of hands, how many of you in the audience today have an immigration story in the last 3 generations? Okay, so you can relate to this story. They never found the uncle's grave. And for reasons that my family doesn't fully know, the surviving uncle went back to China, leaving behind Wu Shou, an 11-year-old boy who couldn't read or write, could only speak Cantonese, to fend for himself in Canada. He ended up finding a job as a houseboy with a white Canadian family in New Westminster. Our lives have critical junctures, key moments where a decision can take us down a completely different path. Wu Shou, being left in Canada as a young boy to fend for himself, this was one of his critical junctures. And in fact, not just for him, for all the generations that came after him, and for my family and myself as well. As I stand here today at this conference theme, Together We Change, I want to talk about something that I think about every day, personally and professionally. Optimism. Not naive idealism, but optimism grounded in a fact-based worldview. As somebody who teaches global politics and history, sometimes I feel like the Roman god Janus with 2 faces. One face is looking backward at our history, at where we've come. But the other face is looking forward at our possibilities. And here's where I see a gap, a problem. The historical data tells us something remarkable. The world is significantly better than it was in the past. Most people now live in countries at least in the middle income bracket. Child mortality has plummeted. Fewer people die from disease, conflict, and famine. We live longer, healthier lives. More and more children are getting an education. Women's rights have improved dramatically. And yet, many of us are unaware of this progress. In fact, research shows we tend to have a negative perception of how the world has changed. So, inspired by the great Swedish statistician Hans Rosling, I decided to test this myself. For the past few years, in my classes, I have been asking my students these questions. For example, in the last 20 years, the proportion of the world population living in poverty has increased or decreased. You get the idea. The results have been clear and consistent. My students, like most people in the world, consistently think things are worse than they actually are. So why this disconnect? Why this flawed perception? Are my students pessimists? Are we all natural pessimists? What's going on here? Okay? Thankfully, there's been a lot of research into this area. Here are 3 reasons I'm going to share with you today for this gap between perception and reality. Okay? The first reason is that it's biological. Okay? Research by psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, Nobel Prize-winning psychologists, have shown us that the pleasure we get from gaining is not as high as the pain we receive from a loss. And this leads to something called loss aversion. Show of hands, can any of you think of a time in your life when fear of a loss held you back and caused you not to go for an opportunity? I know I have. So loss aversion is a mental trap because we become so focused on avoiding losses that we miss opportunities for growth and change. It's great for survival, but it can provide a skewed perception of reality because the negative events and memories stay with us. They're stronger than the positive events. So our biology hardwires us for loss aversion. The second reason is our information diet. Unless we actively seek diverse perspectives, our views are shaped by mass media that focuses on extraordinary, unusual, usually negative events. And this pattern is now augmented by social media. Influencers, companies trying to sell you a product, even human rights NGOs raising awareness about issues use the same tactics. They present problems that make you feel like there's something wrong with you or with the world, and you need to act immediately to either buy their product or donate to their cause. Now, I'm not saying there are no challenges in the world that we need to be paying attention to. But the issue is that these narratives distort the broader reality of the progress we're making. So our biology hardwires us for loss aversion. Our information diet can overwhelm us with a skewed representation of what's happening. And the third reason is that progress feels slow. Historian Daniel Wooten notes that our GDP per capita in the world has increased 8-fold in the last 100 years. And yet, when you average that at only 3% per year, you may not notice it. People don't remember the world that they were born into. They remember the last few months, when progress seems invisible. So, let me return to my great-grandfather, Shou Woo. While working as a houseboy, he taught himself to read and write in English and Cantonese by reading the newspaper every day. He sent whatever money he could back to his mother in China. He learned to navigate both Chinese and Canadian cultures, and later on leveraged this cross-cultural capability to build successful businesses in logging and fisheries, connecting Western Canada and China. Together, he and my great-grandmother had 8 children, the last of whom was my grandfather. He's the little guy in the middle there. Shou Woo was a man of strong character and ethics. He insisted that all his daughters go to university, a revolutionary idea at the time. Despite facing considerable discrimination as a Chinese Canadian, he propelled my family from illiteracy and poverty to prosperity and education in a single generation. That is a critical juncture. I believe none of it would have been possible without optimism. Now, I feel that some of you in the audience may be skeptical of this claim. But as I always tell my students to do, I can back this claim up with research. The science backs this up. Barbara Fredrickson's research revealed something fascinating. Optimists literally see more possibilities than pessimists. Their minds expand, making connections that others miss. And when obstacles arise, Jean Alarcon's meta-analysis of 97 studies shows that optimists persevere and develop effective coping strategies which allow them to find new paths forward. Shou's success wasn't simply about personal resilience or an opportunistic eye. So let me rephrase. Resilience and opportunism is strengthened with optimism, right? But his success wasn't only about that. His success also came because of how he acted and because he was lucky to land in the community in which he landed. My great-grandfather didn't succeed alone. He succeeded because his new community gave him a chance. He succeeded because he built bridges between cultures, something that you're probably going to hear a lot about today. He succeeded because he believed in investing in a future that he was certain would be better. His story shows optimism doesn't just affect how we see the world, it affects how we act in it. This is the hidden power of optimism. It gives us the resilience to weather challenges, the vision to spot opportunities, but most importantly, it inspires us to reach out, to collaborate, and to harness the remarkable potential that exists when we come together across cultures, generations, and divides. We're living in a time when optimism is under threat. Many of our world's leaders sing only narratives of despair, anger, and pessimism. But when I look at my great-grandfather's story, who arrived alone, unable to read or write, yet built a legacy of education and opportunity, I see the power of founded optimism. 2 Junes ago, I sat with my grandfather. His name was Bing Wu, but I called him Gung Gung using the Cantonese honorific. I sat with him in the final days of his life. He became a successful investment counselor who helped guide national pension funds. Like his father before him, he spent his life looking for opportunities, tracking human progress, and collaborating with others. I asked him in those final days what message he wanted to pass on. I want to share them with you now, his message with you now. He said, stay optimistic about humankind's ability to creatively work together to solve the problems that we face. So at the end of today, I'd like you to take a moment to consider 2 questions. What would change in your life if you approached challenges with founded optimism rather than reflexive pessimism? Secondly, like Wushu and my grandfather Bing, where might you build bridges across cultures that could create opportunities for yourself and for those who follow? Founded optimism is not blind hope. The challenges today are real, okay? But our capacity it's the reminder that our capacity to overcome them is greater. The data shows us how much progress we've made, how far we've come. When we combine optimism with meaningful action, we don't just change our own stories, we can change the world. Thank you.